Hello and good day everyone. We hope you are totally fine today as we continue our journey in this course. Today, we are very happy to share our output for this activity. Our group will be discussing about the speech of President Corazon Aquino in the joint session of United States Congress in September 1986. Before we start with the discussion, allow me to introduce the reporters. Mr. Kark P. Lopez will be sharing about the background of President Corazon Cuanco Aquino, to be followed by a presentation of the historical background of the document by Ms. Jessime D. Tomindog. Ms. Liesl Cabaratan will follow and give us the summary and analysis of the speech. Finally, it will be closed by Ms. Kichel May Nakasabag, with her discussion about the contribution and relevance of the document. So what are you waiting for? Let's begin the discussion.
Before we tackle the main topic, first, let us discuss about who is Cory Aquino. Maria Corazon Cory Sumulong Cuanco Aquino was a Filipina politician who served as 11th President of the Philippines from 1986 to 1992. She was the most prominent figure of the 1986 People Power Revolution, which ended the two-decade rule of President Marcos and led to the establishment of the current democratic Fifth Philippine Republic. Corazon Aquino was married to Senator Benigno Aquino Jr., who was one of the most prominent critics of President Marcos. After the assassination of her husband on August 21, 1983, she emerged as leader of the opposition against the president. In late 1985, Marcos called for a snap election, and Aquino ran for president with former Senator Salvador Laurel as her running mate for vice president. After the election held on February 7, 1986, the Batasang Pambansa proclaimed Marcos and his running mate Arturo Tolentino as the winners, which prompted allegations of electoral fraud and Aquino's call for massive civil disobedience actions. Subsequently, the People Power Revolution and nonviolent mass demonstration movement took place from February 22 to 25. The People Power Revolution, along with the defections from the armed forces of the Philippines and support from the Philippine Catholic Church, successfully ousted Marcos and secured Aquino's accession to the presidency on February 25, 1986. Prior to her election as president, Aquino oversaw the drafting of the 1987 Constitution, which limited the powers of the presidency and established the bicameral Congress, successfully removing the previous dictatorial government structure. Her economic policies focused on forging good economic standing amongst the international community, as well as disestablishing the Marcos-era crony capitalist monopolies, emphasizing the free market and responsible economy. Her administration pursued peace talks to resolve Moro conflict, and the result of these talks was the creation of autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. Aquino was also criticized for the Mindiola massacre, which resulted in the shooting deaths of at least 12 peaceful protesters by Philippine state security forces. The Philippines faced various natural calamities in later part of Aquino's administration, such as the 1990 Luzon earthquake and the tropical storm Thelma. Several rebellion attempts were also made against her government. She was succeeded as president by Fidel V. Ramos and returned to civilian life. Aquino was diagnosed with colorectal cancer in 2008 and died on August 1, 2009. Her son Benigno Aquino III served as president of the Philippines from 2010 to 2016. After her passing, monuments were built and public landmarks were named in honor of Corazon Aquino all over the Philippines. She is continually highly regarded by her native country, where she is called the mother of democracy.
So now, let us proceed to the historical background of the document. On September 22, 1972, opposition Senator Benigno Aquino Jr., together with senators, publishers, and anyone who had spoken up for the democracy, was arrested at the Manila Hilton Hotel in Ermita, Manila by elements of the Philippines Constabulary Metropolitan Command, led by Colonel Romeo Gatan. This arrest happened a day after President Ferdinand E. Marcos signed Proclamation Number 1081 declaring the entire Philippines under martial law. This was the first time that his family lost him. This was the second time they've lost him. On August 27, 1973, Ninoy was brought back to Fort Bonifacio where he faced a military tribunal on charges of murder, illegal possession of firearms, and subversion. They locked him up in a tiny, nearly airless cell in a military camp in the north. They stripped him naked and held a threat of a sudden midnight execution over his head. Ninoy held up manfully under all of it. For 43 days, the authorities would not tell his family what had happened to him. On August 13, 1983, Aquino began a meandering week-long flight that took him from Boston to Los Angeles and through Singapore, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. Because Marcos had cut off diplomatic relations with Taiwan, the government there was under no obligation to cooperate with his regime's goal of keeping Aquino away from Manila. As China Airlines Flight 811 descended into Manila International Airport on August 21, 1983, Aquino warned the foreign journalists traveling with him to have their cameras ready. In a matter of 3 or 4 minutes, it could be all over. He noted with chilling prescience. Minutes after the plane touched down, Aquino was dead, killed by an assassin's bullet. So Cory Aquino left America to bury her husband. Still we fought for honor, and if only for honor we shall pay. She emphasized that the fight they started was not wasted, and it was not a nonsense one. That they, the Filipinos, put up a good fight against the administration. In May 1984, new elections for parliament took place and opposition parties claimed 58 of 183 available seats even though there was large allegations of election fraud. Corazon had publicly endorsed all of the candidates running for the opposition parties. Marcos recently called for snap or early presidential elections amid sharp domestic and U.S. criticism over his handling of a growing communist insurgency and a severe economic crisis. Corazon Aquino, despite a lack of political experience, she would consider running against Marcos if 1 million signatures had been collecting or urging her to enter the race. Former newspaper publisher Joaquin Roses, 72, said his group has collected 1,500,882 signatures as of 6:35 p.m. Monday in support of her candidacy. The ultimate result was the election of Mrs. Corazon Aquino as president and Mr. Salvador Laurel as vice president of the Philippines. Moving on, here is Lizelle to report the speech of Corazon Aquino.
The Speech of Corazon Aquino. When former President Corazon Aquino spoke before a joint session of the United States Congress in September of 1986, the dust was only beginning to settle. It was her first visit to America since the dictator Ferdinand Marcos had been deposed in February of the same year. and the Philippines was reckoning with everything his administration had inflicted. That included $26 billion in total foreign debt and a communist insurgency that grew throughout the Marcos era from 500 armed guerrillas to 16,000. We were just at the start of a long road to recovery. So Aquino lodged an appeal for help. Addressing the House, she delivered a historic speech that managed to sway in our favor to vote for an emergency $200 million aid appropriation. In the moving speech penned by her speechwriter and our current ambassador in the United Nations, Teddy Locsin Jr., Aquino defended her reconciliatory stand on the communist insurgency, a sensitive issue in the US given that this was 1986, and asked for financial aid towards rebuilding the Philippine economy. We fought for honor, and if only for honor, we shall pay, she said, agreeing to pay the debt that was stolen by Marcos. And yet, should we have to wring the payments from the sweat of our men's faces and sink all the wealth piled up by the bandsman 250 years of unrequited toil? The speech was impassioned, deeply personal, and effective. Interrupted 11 times by applause, and the book ended with standing ovations. House Speaker Tip O'Neill called it the finest speech I've ever heard in my 34 years in Congress. Senate Majority Leader Robert Dole told her, "Cory, you hit a home run," and the Minority Whip Trent Lutz said, "Let's just say the emotion of the moment saved the day." It would go down in the annals of our history as one of the former president's finest speeches.
Contribution and relevance of the document in understanding the grand narrative of Philippine history. In March 1986, Aquino proclaimed a provision constitution and soon thereafter appointed a commission to write a new constitution. She failed to undertake fundamental economic or social reforms, and her popularity steadily declined as she faced continual outcries over economic injustice and political corruption. These problems were exacerbated by persistent warfare between the communist insurgency and the military whose loyalties to Aquino were uncertain. In general, her economic policies were criticized for being mixed or faltering in the face of mass poverty. Aquino was succeeded in office by her former Defense Secretary Fidel Ramos. The ratification of the new constitution was followed by the election of senators and Congress the same year and the holding of local election in 1988. President Aquino and President Reagan discussed her strenuous effort to bolster the democratic institution of her country and to ensure its security and strengthen its economy. And he assured her all that America wants the Philippine democracy to succeed and to prosper, and that we'll do what we can to help. Most of the money went to buy the 1986 snap election. On top of that, we have been left with a staggering foreign debt of $26 billion and nothing to show for it except some remarkable architecture in New York. Half of our much-needed export revenues are required just to pay for the interest on that debt. It is also stated that Filipinos face a communist insurgency that feeds on economic deterioration, even though they carry a great share of the free world defenses in the Pacific. These are only two of the many burdens the people carry even as they try to build a worthy and enduring house for their new democracy. Half the export earnings $2 billion out of $4 billion, which was all they could earn in the restrictive markets of the world, went to pay just the interest on the debt whose benefit the Filipino people never received. Corazon Aquino was devastated and sad about the situation of the country, about 2 decades of social and political oppression. The speech of the former President Corazon Aquino gives us the insight on how Filipinos struggled to attain freedom and between the insisted resistance from the past have inspired Filipino revolutionaries in our current era. It also gives clarification about what really happened during the time of Ninoy Aquino. The document described the struggles faced by the Aquinos to help the Philippines achieve freedom. The document also mentioned about the debt incurred by the former government before Cory Aquino. This speech also shows how the dictatorship transforms into democratic government, from its president down to its laws, order, and rules. The document also mentioned the killing of Ninoy Aquino and the terror from torture and conviction during the martial law. It shows the problem faced by Corazon Aquino as soon as she became the president, for instance, the poverty and unemployment. The document mentioned 2 elections occurred after the death of Ninoy Aquino. His wife participated during the election and lost in the first election. During the second, which is snap election, she became the president and declares democracy in the country.